Okay. Welcome in, and let's take a deep breath together. Welcome ourselves into this virtual Beit Midrash, this space of learning for ourselves. Take in all that has unfolded today. And as the sun is still out, but it's going to set soon, so let's take a moment to acknowledge this day and begin to let it go by saying an evening Shema together. Join me, please. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. We proclaim that there is one life force, one source of life that animates all of life, and feel a bit of humility and a bit of relief in reminding ourselves of that in the morning and in the evening. Tonight is the 5th of the 6 sessions, and so we're at the penultimate section of the Shema this evening. If you take your Siddur and open up to page 283, we can see there the text that we're going to be looking at. And I would also like to screen share it, and just need a moment to pull up the right there. Okay. Goodness. Okay. This will be an interesting experiment. Okay, so this is what you have in front of you here is almost the same exact text that's on page 283 in the Siddur. It's the middle paragraph, what we call the middle paragraph of the Shema. I want to just bring up one more time the outline of the Shema so we can remind ourselves of these paragraphs. Here, right here. Sorry, let me just screen share one more time. Okay, so this is just the opening outline that you've now seen each week.
Sorry.
And here we are at September 14th. We're in this passage that's known as Vehaya im Shamoa, which I've subtitled, How Does It Work? And hopefully that'll become clear in the next few minutes. And below this, you can see here the 3 major sections of the Shema. Last week, we looked at the Shema itself and Ve'ahavta. Tonight is this one, this middle one, Vehaya im Shamoa. And then next week, the last week, will be the final paragraph, which was known as Vayomer. Okay, so just situating ourselves, kind of where are we this week? Okay, so now let's go back to the text itself. Bear with me, I'm just toggling between a few different things I want to be able to share with you. Okay. So I pulled this up in front of us because I want us to see what comes right before the passage that's in the Siddur. So if you just to orient us, if you look at your Siddur, even if you're not that comfortable with Hebrew, okay, I'm going to have to ask for your patience for just a moment while I take care of this animal. Please bear with me. Audrey, if you can just pause the recording for a moment. Talk amongst yourselves for 30 seconds, please. Apologies. I wanted to show the verses that lead us into Vehaya im Shamoa, that middle paragraph. And so if you look on page 283, I was starting to say, even if you're not that comfortable with Hebrew, just notice the first word, which is Vehaya. And you can recognize on screen, that shows up, you can see where my cursor is rolling around here, it's verse 13. This is where the text from the Torah is that gets then harnessed to the Siddur. If people don't mind muting for this part, I just make it easier for us to hear. But what I want to do first is just look with you quickly at the verses in the Torah that lead into the part that's in our Siddur, if this, hopefully this is making sense. So starting back at verse 10, the children of Israel are being told, the land you are about to enter and inherit, lo ke'eretz Mitzrayim hi. It's not like the land of Egypt, asher yatzatem misham, where you came forth, asher tizra et zaracha, v'hishkita beraglecha, the place where in order to grow seeds, to plant seeds and to grow them, you would have to water them, it says, with your feet, v'hishkita beraglecha, meaning you'd have to walk back and forth from the Nile to your field to water the land. Let me skip ahead now. V'ha'aretz asher atem ovrim shama l'rishta, the land you're about to enter and possess and inherit. This land is Eretz Harim Uvekaot. It's a land of mountains and valleys. Limtar Hashamayim Tishtei Mayim. It's a place where the land is watered from the heavens. It drinks from the heavens. And finally, the last verse before the part that's in our Siddur. Eretz Asher Adonai Elohecha, a land where Adonai, your God, Doresh Ota Tamid, is constantly in search of you, is constantly seeking you out. Einei Adonai Elohecha, the eyes of God, ba mireshit hashana ve'ad acharit hashana. They will stay focused on you from the beginning of the year until its end. Okay, so the really just fascinating language framing the importance of rain as a symbol of God's presence and God's watchfulness. Okay, so now let's go on to the Shema text itself. Here we are. Hopefully people can see this, beginning with verse 13. And the reason I have titled this, How Does It Work? Let me just turn that all off. Is because it's here in Vehaya im Shamoah that we get some little bit of detail about how it is that we fulfill this commandment to love God with our whole heart, our whole soul, everything that we have, as we said in Ve'ahavta, in the part we looked at last week. We hear that theme of love get doubled and redoubled. And so, okay, how does it work? How do we love God? Through the mitzvot. And that's why we say that Ve'ahavta, that first paragraph, Shema and Ve'ahavta that we looked at last week, is all Malchut Shamayim, the burden or the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, where we recognize ourselves in relationship to that one life force. And the second paragraph of the Shema that we're looking at now is known in rabbinic language as all mitzvot. It's the yoke of the mitzvot. It's where we say, okay, the love sounds good. How do we do it? Now we're going to find out at least one version of how to find out. Okay, so you can look now in your Siddur or at the screen. It's the same text. It says to us, Vehaya im shamoah tishma'u el mitzvotai. If you really pay attention and listen, shamoah, the same word as shema, only in a different form. Tishma'u el mitzvotai, you will hear, absorb, accept, in a sense, the mitzvot, the laws of life. Asher anochi mitzaveh etchem hayom, the ones that I am commanding you this day, le'ahava et Adonai Elohechem, to love Adonai your God, ule'avdo b'chol levavchem u'b'chol nafshechem, and to serve that life force with all your heart and all your soul. And now let's continue. V'natati matar artsechem be'ito. I will give you, matar is another word for rain. It's different from geshem. It's matar has almost a feeling of dew, like it's a gentle, beautiful moisture that comes just as much as we need. V'natati matar artsechem, I will give you moisture upon your land, be'ito, in its season, meaning it'll rain when it's supposed to in the right amount, and it won't rain when it's not supposed to. Ve'asafta deganecha v'tiroshcha v'yitzharecha. And as a result of that beautifully modulated moisture that will come from heaven, your produce will be healthy and robust and nourishing for you. And it goes on to explain all of the ways that you'll know that life is in balance. Okay, then skip down with me to verse 16. And on the other hand, hishamru lachem. Take care now. Pen yifteh levavchem. In case your heart gets distracted, remember we talked about levavchem. Levav, heart, is really like consciousness. Your mind gets lost in some other thing. V'sartem va'avadetem Elohim achirim. You start to get seduced by other gods. V'hishtchavitem lahem, and you start to bow down to those other gods. What will happen then? V'chara af Adonai bachem. It says here, God's anger will flare up against you. It's so interesting the way these translation processes work. V'chara af Adonai bachem. Af Adonai is the nose of God, like God's nostrils are going to flare. I mean, it's just interesting the way they say, I'm find myself in the English here. God's anger will flare up against you, but it's really that image of that. And v'adama, v'lo yeh matar, I want to get to this. V'atzar et hashamayim. The heavens will close up. V'lo yeh matar, there will not be this beautiful moisture on the land. Lo titen et yevula va'avadetem mehera. You will not have the produce that you need to live on. So it's very cause and effect, very reward and punishment, and it's all based on rain, which is why I couldn't resist starting with the Eric Clapton tonight, who says in his own modern interpretation of this passage, let it rain, let your love pour down on me in the form of rain in its correct season. Okay, now I need to skip to a different screen share. Just make sure it's in the place that I need it to be. Back to our source sheet for our Shema class. Share screen, 6 weeks. Okay, now we're back in our place. And so I'm skipping through to bring us to where we are this week. Okay. Can I ask for a reader for this passage from Reuven Hammer? Larry, would you do it? Are you comfortable reading that? Just don't forget to unmute.
Yeah, I'm comfortable.
Great.
As anyone who is familiar with Israel knows, the presence or absence of rain there makes a powerful impression. The paucity of natural water sources makes the land of Israel almost entirely dependent on rainfall. With it, the crops grow and the land flourishes. Without it, everything perishes. It is easy to see, therefore, why both the Torah and later Judaism seized on rain as the visible symbol of God's reward or punishment. The rabbis went so far as to imply that God deliberately made the land of Israel heavily dependent on the rains in order to assure that people be conscious daily of their need for God and for God's gifts. In biblical language, then, rain represents reward and punishment, and this second paragraph of the Shema affirms that reward and punishment do exist. If the first paragraph is an assertion of the existence of the one God, the second is an assertion that God is a just and concerned God. not the divine watchmaker who creates the mechanism of the universe, but then departs from it and has no concern with it or with the conduct of human life.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Sorry, I just fixed my little one God, not on God. So just here, he's reaffirming what we've been talking about. If the first paragraph, meaning ve'ahavta, Shema and ve'ahavta is kind of we think of as the first paragraph, is an assertion of the existence of the one God, what we were calling Ol Malchut Shamayim, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, which is to say, sort of such abstract language, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven we could translate as, here I am, one tiny human being, and when I say the Shema, what I mean is I recognize myself in relationship to that greater reality, that greater transcendent life force that we call God. That is one way to think of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. The second, the part we're looking at tonight, is an assertion that God is a just and concerned God. God is watching to see how we're going to behave and responding in kind. Now, this can be tricky territory for modern people. It's a challenging theology. And in fact, it was so challenging that if you're holding the Reconstructionist Siddur and you turn back to page 278 and 79, you'll see that the editors from, it's more than 25 years now, when they were compiling this Siddur, said, we're going to continue to hold on to a Reconstructionist alternative. In the earlier Reconstructionist Siddur, the one before this one, we didn't have the V'haya im Shamoa. They took it out altogether, and they only gave this alternative version, which starts with the same language, V'haya im Shamoa, Tishma b'kol Adonai Elohecha, etc., but removes this reward and punishment ideology or theology. It offers a depiction of God's blessing, and that's all. 25 years ago, when the editors were compiling this Siddur, they said, you know what? I think we should put the traditional V'haya im Shamoa back in. And that's what you see here on page 282 and 3 as biblical selection number 2, is actually the traditional middle section of the Shema that you would find in any other Siddur, Let's look together at the bottom of 282, and you'll see there a teaching from Rabbi Art Green, who is really he really is Gadol Hador, one of our great teachers of our generation, who happened to be the head of the Reconstruction Rabbinical College when this Siddur was being put together and had a hand in helping to shape what the Siddur looked like. He says that traditional second paragraph of the Shema offers an account of the natural process by which the blessings of God themselves lead to pride, self-satisfaction, and ingratitude on the part of those who receive them. So that's his way of reinterpreting what happens when we let our hearts or our consciousness go astray and we flaunt our humility before God. Ironically, the more we are blessed, so it seems, the less grateful we are. The less grateful and aware of blessing we become. It is when we are most sated, Scripture warns us, that we should be most careful. Fullness can lead to ingratitude, and ingratitude to idolatry, which is the move that the Torah makes, primarily in the form of worship of our own accomplishments. Then indeed, as he quotes the Torah now, the heavens might close up and no rain fall. For once we begin to worship our achievements, we will never find satisfaction. And then if you turn over to the David Teutsch reading on 283, the traditional second paragraph of the Shema was replaced by another biblical selection in earlier Reconstructionist liturgy because the traditional paragraph was understood as a literal reward and punishment. However, today, in light of our awareness of the human abuse of the environment, we recognize that often this reward and punishment rest in our own hands. And so that is why they chose to put it back in the Siddur, thinking that, in fact, in our time, it's just what we need to be saying on a regular basis to remind ourselves of our responsibility to the mitzvot and of our power to affect the unfolding evolution of ecology. Okay, I have one more thing I want to share with you. Okay, let's look back on screen now. Okay, so this is now a midrash that is trying to explain more about this section of the Torah. From Sifrei is an early midrashic collection. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, let's take this analogy. A king had many sons and servants who were fed and sustained by him, the key to the storehouse being in his hand. When they do his will, he opens the storehouse and they eat and are sated. When they do not do his will, he unlocks the storehouse and they die of hunger. Thus it is with Israel. When they do God's will, God will open for you his goodly treasure trove, meaning the heavens. And when they do not, we have what we just looked at. V'chara af Adonai v'atzarat hashamayim. God's anger will burn against you, and God will hold back the heavens, and there will not be rain. And of course, if you follow what we were reading in the lead up to V'haya im Shamoah, the verses before that, which emphasized so much, the children of Israel now are coming into a place where rain is a sign of God's presence in your life. When it rains well, you'll know that everything is okay. And when it's out of its season in one way or another, you need to know that that's a sign of God's anger or displeasure. So I have one more text that I want to look at with you this evening. Just skip down. But before I do that, I want to just pause and ask for your thoughts on this and what you do with this paragraph yourself. Audrey, go ahead. Don't forget to unmute.
I have a quick question, then a thought.
Okay.
Where does biblical selection 1 come from?
Biblical selection number 1, it comes from a different part of Deuteronomy, from Deuteronomy 28.
Okay, so it's still part of it's still in the Torah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's very much, I mean, I have to say, the Reconstructionist, the founding generation of Reconstructionist editors who made some changes to the Siddur were very careful to be respectful of Tanakh. They never changed Tanakh. In other words, they never changed the words of Tanakh. They understand that we don't do that. And wherever they decided to make a change to the liturgy, they try to replace it with something else of sort of equal stature or equal authenticity, so to speak. The same thing with our Torah blessings. When we say, how we say instead, Asher Kervanu La'avodato, instead of Asher Bachar Banu. And that phrase, Asher Kervanu La'avodato, is also taken from the liturgy. They didn't just make that up over here.
Right.
They said, wait, we can find something else that we can substitute well.
Right. I appreciate that. And then my only thought is, in my own personal practice, because I say this so often, I kind of blend the two biblical selections.
Okay.
I'll take a little piece of this, the first one, and then the second one, and then I'll mix it up. So I try to add variety by using both of those selections. And it works, because I agree with everything that you said about both selections, and I'm not uncomfortable with it. I think many people probably can justify, okay, we're okay with that, or at least people I know.
Okay, and you take a little bit from the first because the second, the traditional one, is challenging?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I just like the language about, what the first selection says. And I believe it's there for a purpose and a reason. And I want to be moved by those words as well. I don't want to just dismiss it, because there was thought given into it. And the idea of the second selection, especially the second paragraph, so place these words upon your heart, really seals the deal for me, you know, and I don't want to exclude that particular part in my practice. And you know what, the consequences of not following the mitzvot, I kind of go there. It's
What do you
okay.
mean, Ken?
I mean, I believe that my actions and my belief in God and all that, I want to do my mitzvot so that good things will happen. As childish in some ways as that might seem, I believe that if I live a certain way of life, I will be okay, or I'll be able to cope with that which life can give me.
You'll be able to cope with
With whatever life can give
whatever
me.
life throws at
If
you.
I follow these practices, that's kind of where I've come down to. But
Great.
that's enough said.
Thank you. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is all in the collective. So it's
Mhm.
not individual. It's not about you, Audrey. It's not about me. It's not about Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
It's and I don't think it's just about Jews, frankly. I mean, I think it's
Mhm.
about humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And the question that just burns in my brain, and at some point it was important for me to read Emil Fackenheim, and he says this reward and punishment stuff is utterly, 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 like, forget it. Because if you're in Auschwitz, it's like Job. You know, Job said, this is crazy, God. And, you know, and Fackenheim says to think that somebody in Auschwitz was responsible for their fate is utter, it's blasphemous. It's awful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what we're talking about is God made evil in the hearts of people. And we know that. We know that more than ever now. And this is speaking to humanity as a whole, in my mind, you know, and it's, we don't even have to think of a God. It's just common sense, you know, and the point is that we want to hear. I mean, there's this whole spirituality that, you know, you really do hear. Rachel called this whole 6 sessions about hearing, and the
Mm-hmm.
point is for us to hear as humanity and to hear
Not as
together.
individuals.
Pardon? Not,
Not as
it's not,
individuals.
it's in the plural. I mean, the Hebrew's in the plural.
Yes.
And, you know, so, you know, it's a matter of all of us hearing as a corporate body of people. And it's not just, so what that means, it has to do with influence. You know, it has to do with culture. It has to do with right? I mean, there are people in this world who are able to convince other people in this world to do the right thing. I mean, right? And that's non-trivial. We fail. We obviously failed in 1942, and we failed in 2016, and we could be failing now. And you know, so it's not easy. It's really not easy, and it certainly is not a matter of halacha. I really do not think it's a strict black and white matter of halacha. I mean, I think that's really problematic to think that that certainly is not what I believe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is so rich and helpful. And there's so much to say about the challenge of living in an American society that really values the freedom of the individual, the agency of the individual, and somehow harmonizing that, as we have to keep doing as Jewish Americans, with a religious tradition, as you're saying, that wants us to see ourselves as a people and to accept the commandments that were given as a collective, not always as individuals. The hour for ending is almost here. I wanted to just share one translation of this Vehaya im Shamoa paragraph by Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi. We've seen it a couple of times at Adat Shalom over the years, but I think not in quite a while. And I think it speaks for itself. So I'll just put it in front of us. Here. We read this actually in our when we were studying Parashat Ekev, which is where this passage comes from. So could I ask for an English reader here?
I can read it.
Great.
Starting with how good?
Yes.
How good it will be when you really listen and hear my directions, which I give you today for loving Yah, who is your God, and to act godly with feeling and inspiration. Your earthly needs will be met at the right time, appropriate to the season. You will reap what you planted for your delight and health. Also, your animals will have ample feed, and all of you will eat and be content. Be careful, watch out. Don't let your cravings delude you. Don't become alienated. Don't let your cravings become your gods. Don't debase yourself to them, because the God sense within you will become distorted. Heaven will be shut to you. Grace will not descend. Earth will not yield her produce. Your rushing will destroy you, and earth will not be able to recover her good balance in which God's gifts manifest. May these values of mine reside in your feelings and aspirations, marking what you produce, guiding what you perceive. Teach them to your children so that they are instructed how to make their homes sacred and how they deal with traffic, even when you are depressed. And when you are elated, mark your entrances and exits with them so you'll be more aware. Then you and your children and their children will live out on earth that divine promise given to your ancestors to live heavenly days right here on this earth. That's beautiful.
Thank you. So in his inimitable creative style, he gets around some of the challenging theological statements, at least that we find challenging. And he even, as you notice, he even skirts the issue of Israel altogether and just makes this, even I think as Larry, you were starting to suggest, is it really isn't about necessarily Jewish particularism, even though it's coming from the Torah, but could be about much broader lessons for living on the planet. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Everyone keep well, and I hope to see you next week for our final session.